I still remember the first time I heard the rumors about Bloody Mary. It was a typical Friday night, and my friends and I were huddled around my computer, scrolling through creepypasta websites. One particular legend caught our attention: the story of Bloody Mary, the vengeful spirit who would grant wishes to those brave or foolish enough to summon her. The basic premise was simple: stare into a mirror for 13 seconds. Say, Bloody Mary 3 times and she'd appear, offering you your heart's desire. We laughed it off as a silly urban legend, but there was something about the story that lingered in my mind. Maybe it was the eerie image of Bloody Mary herself, a ghostly figure with sunken eyes and long, flowing hair. Or perhaps it was the sense of forbidden knowledge that came with exploring such a dark topic. Whatever the reason, I found myself becoming increasingly obsessed with the legend, devouring every scrap of information I could find on the subject. My friends started to notice my growing fixation, and they'd often tease me about my Bloody Mary phase. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was truth to the story, that one day I might just stumble upon a way to summon Bloody Mary herself and make a wish. As I sat in front of my computer, scrolling through forums and Reddit threads, I began to feel an unsettling sense of presence around me. It started as a slight tingling sensation on the back of my neck, but it quickly spread throughout my body, like a cold sweat was spreading across my skin. I tried to brush it off as mere paranoia, but deep down, I knew that something was watching me. I decided then and there that I would try to summon Bloody Mary. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. And so, with a sense of trepidation and excitement, I began to prepare myself for the encounter of a lifetime. I spent the next few days researching everything I could find on Bloody Mary. I scoured the internet for videos, images, and stories from people who claimed to have summoned her. I even bought a cheap mirror online, just so I could practice my Bloody Mary incantation in front of it. I started small, just staring into the mirror for 13 seconds at a time, saying Bloody Mary 3 times. At first, it felt ridiculous, like I was playing some kind of twisted game. But as the days went by, I found myself becoming more and more invested in the ritual. I started to feel a sense of unease whenever I looked into the mirror. It's hard to describe. It was like my reflection wasn't quite right, like there was something lurking just beneath the surface. I tried to brush it off as fatigue or stress, but deep down, I knew that something was off. I began to feel a sense of anticipation whenever I looked into the mirror. It was like I was waiting for something to happen, some kind of revelation or awakening. And when nothing did, I felt even more restless. One night, as I was staring into the mirror, I started to feel a presence around me. At first, it was just a faint buzzing in my ear, but it quickly grew louder until I could feel it vibrating through my entire body. I spun around, trying to see what was making the noise, but there was nothing there. That's when I saw her, a fleeting glimpse of a figure standing just behind me. It was Bloody Mary, or at least, that's what I thought it was. She was tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. For a moment, we locked gazes, and I felt like I was drowning in her gaze. When she vanished, the mirror shook violently, as if someone had just slammed their hand against its surface. I stumbled backward, my heart racing with fear. I knew then that I had to be careful. Bloody Mary was real, and she was not to be trifled with. I started digging deeper into the history of Bloody Mary, trying to find out more about her origins and motivations. I spent hours poring over old books and documents, searching for any mention of her name. It wasn't easy. There were few references to her in historical records, and most of them were cryptic and unclear. But one passage stood out, a small, handwritten entry in an ancient tome that described Bloody Mary as a spirit of the waters, born from the darkness of human desire. According to the text, she was once a mortal woman who had made a pact with a malevolent force to gain eternal life. The cost of this pact, however, was her soul, and the souls of those around her. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the words. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, but there was something unsettlingly plausible about it. Maybe that's why I kept reading, even though I knew I shouldn't be. The more I learned, the more I realized that Bloody Mary wasn't just a myth, she was a warning. I started to feel like I was playing with fire, summoning this dark entity into my life. But at the same time, I couldn't help feeling drawn to her. There was something seductive about her power, something that made me want to take a chance and see what would happen. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only seemed to intensify as the days went by. I started having strange dreams, full of visions of Bloody Mary and the dark forces she represented. They were always fragmented and disjointed like snapshots from a nightmare, but they left me with a sense of unease that lingered long after I woke up. I knew then that I was in over my head, but I couldn't stop now. I had to see this through, no matter what the cost. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I knew that if I was going to summon Bloody Mary, I needed to be as ready as possible. I set up my mirror in a dimly lit room, surrounded by candles and strange artifacts that I had collected from various occult shops. As the clock struck midnight, I took a deep breath and began the ritual. "Bloody Mary," I whispered, repeating the incantation for what felt like an eternity. At first, there was nothing, just the soft flicker of the candles and the creaking of the old house. But then I saw her. Bloody Mary stood in front of me, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. She was even more beautiful than I had imagined, but there was something unsettling about her gaze. It was like she could see right through me, to the very soul within. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Bloody Mary took a step closer, her presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. I felt my heart racing in my chest, my blood pounding through my veins like a drumbeat. And then she spoke. Her voice was low and husky, like a snake slithering through the grass. "What is it that you want, little one?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. I tried to think of something, anything, but my mind was a blank. I felt like I was staring into an abyss, with no safety net to catch me if I fell. Bloody Mary took another step closer, her face inches from mine. "You have 13 seconds, she whispered. "Say your wish, and it shall be granted." I closed my eyes, praying for the courage to do what needed to be done. But as I opened them again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Bloody Mary was no longer alone. As I opened my eyes, I saw Bloody Mary standing in front of me, surrounded by a group of shadowy figures. They were tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers from the underworld. Bloody Mary's gaze seemed to bore into my soul as if she knew all my deepest secrets. "You have 13 seconds, she repeated, her voice dripping with malice. "Say your wish and it shall be granted." I felt a surge of fear, but I tried to compose myself. I thought about what I wanted, what I had always dreamed of having. I wanted wealth, power, and fame. But as I looked into Bloody Mary's eyes, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. She was smiling at me, her lips curled up in a cruel grin. "Very well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your wish is granted." As she spoke, the room began to distort and twist around me. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow longer and more menacing, like grasping fingers. I felt myself being pulled into a vortex of darkness, where the very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling. I tried to scream, but my voice was silenced by some unseen force. I was trapped in a world of madness where nothing made sense and everything was twisted. And then I saw it. a vision of my perfect life, one that I had always dreamed of having. But as I looked closer, I realized that something was wrong. The people in the picture were not who they seemed to be. They were masks, hiding secrets and desires that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, as if my stomach was being twisted into knots. Bloody Mary's laughter echoed through the room, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You should have been more careful what you wished for," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "Now you will never be able to escape." As I watched in horror, the vision began to warp and distort, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. I realized that I was trapped in a nightmare from which I might never awaken. And then, everything went black. As I came back to consciousness, I was disoriented and confused. I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. I looked around the room trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I could feel fear settling in my chest like a cold stone. It tried to talk aloud. Bloody Mary's name but wasn't there. It was nothing. I looked around and I saw that the room was empty. The candles were still burning, but there was no sign of Bloody Mary or her minions. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I might be alone in this place. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt like jelly. I had to sit back down and try to catch my breath. I started to think about what had happened. Had I really summoned Bloody Mary? And if so, what did she want from me? I thought about all the things I could have wished for, but none of them seemed right now. I just wanted to go home. I tried to stand up again, but this time I was able to make it to my feet. I looked around the room and saw that everything was still exactly as it had been when I first arrived. The furniture was in the same place, the walls were the same color, and even the shadows on the floor seemed to be in the same pattern. It was as if nothing had changed. I started to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. What if Bloody Mary hadn't really left? What if she was still out there watching me? I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only got stronger. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. I started to pace back and forth across the room, trying to calm myself down. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my mind. Was I really seeing things, or was it all just a product of my own paranoia? I didn't know what was real and what wasn't anymore. As I continued to pace back and forth across the room, I started to feel like I was living in a dream. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and the shadows cast by the candles appeared to be moving of their own accord. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it only got stronger. Every time I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, I'd turn to see Bloody Mary standing there, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. But whenever I turned to look at her, she'd be gone. I started to wonder if I was really seeing her at all. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? Or was something more sinister at play? I looked around the room again, searching for any sign of reality. The furniture seemed to be shifting and morphing before my very eyes, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. I tried to focus on the candles, but they seemed to be burning in a different pattern than before. The flames danced and flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending loop of paranoia and fear. Every step I took, every move I made, seemed to lead me further down the rabbit hole of madness. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing with anticipation. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the edge of perception. Its eyes glowed like embers in the dark, and its presence seemed to fill the entire room. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't seem to be moving, but I could sense its weight bearing down on me. It was as if it was waiting for me to make a move, to take that final step into the abyss. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down, but my mind was racing with questions. Who was this figure? What did it want from me? And what lay beyond the edge of perception? I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. But as I looked at the figure, my mind began to unravel. The edges of reality seemed to be pulling apart, revealing an abyss of madness that yawned open before me. I felt like I was being pulled into a vortex of terror, with no escape in sight. The figure didn't move, but its presence seemed to be suffocating me. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I saw visions of my childhood, of happy memories with my family, but they were distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. My parents were twisted and grotesque, their faces screaming with anger and hatred. I tried to shake off the vision, but it lingered on. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like I was descending into a world of madness. I saw Bloody Mary again, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. She spoke in a voice that was both familiar and yet completely alien. "You'll never escape me," she hissed. "I'll always be here, waiting for you." I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The world around me seemed to be melting away, revealing an abyss of darkness that yawned open before me. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with terror. But as I looked down at my hands, I saw something that made my blood run cold. They were no longer mine. They were twisted and grotesque, like the faces in my childhood visions. As I stared at my twisted hands in horror, I felt a sense of despair wash over me. I had wished for power and wealth, but it seemed that the price was too high to pay. Bloody Mary's laughter echoed through the room, a cold and mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely above a whisper. "What have you done to me?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the hands that were no longer mine. I felt a surge of pain as I realized that my body was changing. My skin was stretching and contorting, taking on a grotesque and twisted shape. I looked down at my feet and saw that they were merging into one giant, distorted foot. I was becoming something monstrous, something that was not human. I tried to scream, but my voice was silenced by some unseen force. I was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape from the horror that was unfolding before me. I thought of all the things I had wished for, and how they had turned out. Wealth and power were nothing compared to the terror and despair that I now felt. I realized that Bloody Mary's wishes were not to be trifled with, and that the price of her desires was always too high to pay. I looked up at Bloody Mary, who stood before me with a triumphant smile on her face. "You should have thought of that before you made your wishes," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "Never escape you again," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own despair. I was trapped in a living hell, and there was no way out. I stood before Bloody Mary, my twisted and grotesque body a testament to the price of her wishes. I knew that I had to confront the monster within myself if I wanted to escape this living hell. I took a deep breath and looked into Bloody Mary's eyes. She was still smiling, but there was a hint of surprise in her gaze. "You're not afraid of me?" she asked, her voice dripping with amusement. I shook my head, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm not afraid of you," I said. "I'm afraid of what you've made me into." Bloody Mary's smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked. I looked down at my body, at the twisted and distorted limbs that were no longer mine. I thought of all the things I had wished for, and how they had turned out. I realized that I had been so focused on getting what I wanted that I had forgotten what was truly important. I took another deep breath and spoke from the heart. "I want to be human again," I said. "I want to feel normal, to feel like myself." Bloody Mary's expression changed, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of sadness in her eyes. "You don't have to be human anymore," she said. "You can be something more." She raised her hand, and I felt a surge of energy flow through my body. My twisted limbs began to change, to take on a new shape. I felt myself transforming, becoming something new and different. I looked down at my hands, and they were no longer grotesque and distorted. They were mine again, strong and capable. I looked up at Bloody Mary, and she was smiling at me once more. "You're free," she said. "You can be whoever you want to be." As I stood before Bloody Mary, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. She had given me the gift of transformation, but at what cost? I looked down at my hands and saw that they were no longer mine. They were twisted and deformed, a constant reminder of the horrors I had endured. I tried to speak, but my voice was barely above a whisper. "What have you done to me?" I asked, feeling a sense of desperation creeping in. Bloody Mary's smile grew wider, and her eyes seemed to gleam with malevolence. "I've given you the power to heal," she said, "but it comes at a price." She raised her hand, and I felt a surge of energy flow through my body. My hands began to glow with an otherworldly light. I looked down at them in horror as they began to change. They were no longer human, but rather grotesque and twisted appendages that seemed to writhe and squirm like living things. I screamed in terror as I realized the true nature of my transformation. I was no longer human, but a monstrous creature, driven by a hunger for blood and flesh. I stumbled backwards, desperate to escape the horror that had been unleashed upon me. Bloody Mary's laughter echoed through the room, a cold and mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You should have thought of the consequences before you made your wishes," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "I'm trapped in this body now," I whispered, feeling a sense of despair wash over me. "There's no escape." I stumbled backwards, desperate to escape the horror that had been unleashed upon me. But it was too late. Bloody Mary's wrath had begun, and I was at its mercy. I felt a surge of energy course through my body, making my twisted limbs writhe and squirm like living things. I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled by some unseen force. Bloody Mary's laughter echoed through the room, growing louder and more maniacal with every passing moment. She was enjoying this, relishing in my terror. I stumbled forward, trying to get away from her, but she was too quick. She reached out a hand and touched my face, and I felt a searing pain that made me gasp. Bloody Mary's eyes flashed with anger, and she raised her hands to the ceiling. The air around us seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with an unseen force. I felt myself being lifted off the ground, suspended in midair by some invisible thread. I was trapped at the mercy of Bloody Mary's wrath. I could feel my sanity slipping away, fragmenting into 1,000 pieces. I screamed and screamed, but no one came. No one heard me. I was alone, abandoned to the mercy of this monstrous entity. Bloody Mary's face loomed closer and closer, her eyes blazing with fury. I felt my vision begin to blur, my consciousness slipping away into the darkness. I was going to die, trapped in this living hell forever.